Hi, my name's Dr. Sarah Verdon from Sturt University, Australia, and in this presentation I'll be talking about developing culturally responsive practice through professional development and looking at some insights and opportunities for sustainable impact. In an increasingly globalised world, there's a need for professionals to engage in culturally responsive practice when they're providing services to all children and their families. But the research shows us that many early childhood professionals, and that includes speech language pathologists and early childhood educators, report that they lack confidence, competence, and they lack training for working with families from culturally and linguistically diverse background. And so one potential solution for this is to engage in professional development. So the purpose of this study is to have a look at whether or not professional development can have an impact to enhance culturally responsive practice and whether or not that impact can be sustained. First of all, cultural competence is a problematic term for a number of reasons, because it denotes that there is an endpoint to learning in cultural competence training, which we know that there's not. We'll never stop learning about other people's cultures, but more importantly about ourselves and how we respond. So in a recent paper published this year, I tried to redefine this term by using the phrase cultural responsiveness to understand what that is for professionals and how we can apply it in our practice. And it has four key elements. The first is a professional's awareness of their own culture and how this impacts upon their thoughts, actions, interpretation of, and interactions with the world. The second is a willingness to actively listen, learn, and seek out information about the cultures, perspectives, and the experiences of others. The third is an acknowledgement that in any interaction there will always be an element of the unknown, an invisible or implicit power or cultural nuance that we may not necessarily be able to perceive. So we'll never know everything about our interactions with others. And the fourth is that cultural responsiveness is an ongoing process of learning, questioning, and re-evaluating a professional's worldview and their approaches to social interactions. So keeping in mind, that's what the purpose of the professional development in this research was, to enhance these four factors in professionals working with children and their families. So unlike other types of professional development, cultural responsivity training is quite unique because you're not learning about a topic. Actually, the purpose is to look inward and reflect on your own behaviours and practice. The learning has no endpoint. So as I said, you're not going to get a certificate at the end to say that you're culturally competent. This is something that professionals need to commit to for life, because our understanding of the world and how we perceive it continues to evolve. And so in order to be successful, we need to approach cultural responsivity training with a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. So it's been documented in the literature that culturally responsive professionals require a critical consciousness, which means being conscious of the situation that you find yourself in, the social situation or interaction, and taking a critical approach to that. So critiquing power imbalances that exist, critiquing cultural assumptions that exist within those interactions, and really thinking about what is happening in the interaction and how can we balance power so that children and families are given the opportunity to successfully engage in our services. And so it's really important to move beyond generic skills such as knowledge and attitudes towards a critical awareness of ourselves and others and the world around us, and constantly reevaluating this. We need critical reflection upon social relationships with others to foster that reorientation of power imbalances and promote social justice. And we need to critically evaluate the society in which our practice is contextualised to uncover the often unstated or invisible power structures, privilege, biases, and inequities that exist, and try to overcome these. So as I mentioned, there were two key foci to this research. The first was looking at the immediate impact of attending professional development. And the second was looking at whether or not this could create sustained changes to practice over time. So data were collected in 3 ways. The first was a pre-workshop survey, and then a post-workshop survey, and then follow-up interviews with 2 participants. That was 1 year after the workshop. So the initial participants were 52 participants who attended the workshop, and these were multidisciplinary child and family practitioners. And it included early childhood educators, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, social workers, etc. 61% of them spoke English only, but a number also spoke other languages. And on average, 64.4% of the families on the caseloads were from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, which was really the motivation behind why these professionals wanted to attend the training in the first place. So I acknowledge that that does include a little bit of a sample bias, because the people who were attending were already motivated to do something about working cross-culturally. The workshop was based upon the principles of culturally responsive practice, which I developed as part of my PhD in 2015. And there are 6 different principles that are each unpacked in the workshop that support working cross-culturally with families. So looking at the results of the pre-workshop survey, before they engaged in the professional development, 48.1% said that they were confident working with culturally diverse families, but only 1/3 said that they felt they had sufficient training. When they were asked what the major challenges were for working cross-culturally, cultural barriers was the most common understanding. So not understanding culture and child rearing practices, etc. The second most common, unsurprisingly, was language barriers, but they also talked about working with translators and the need to adapt their practice style, among other things. In the post-workshop survey, interestingly, 78.8% did say that they were more confident to work with culturally diverse populations, and 61.5% said that they now felt that they had sufficient training working cross-culturally, which was a bit of a challenging finding for me, because the point of the workshop was to demonstrate that you'll probably never have sufficient training in this area. It's something that you need to keep working at. So when working on a topic like this, it's okay if people say that they need more training. That would be an ideal outcome. So it was an interesting finding that 2/3 just about said that they felt they had sufficient training now. But some of the comments, as you can see, said that they believed it would be ongoing and they don't think that you could ever have enough, which was quite encouraging. They talked about what they learned most from the PD. So they really appreciated learning the framework for practice to conceptualise how to work holistically with families, not just look at the one thing that they were trained to look at. Interestingly, a lot of professionals said that they didn't understand beforehand that there were benefits to being multilingual. So it was encouraging that they had learnt that and now saw that as a real benefit of engaging in the training. And you can see there are a number of other themes that they identified that they'd learnt as well. They were also asked to demonstrate future goals, to think about how they could sustain this learning into the future. And one of the key things that they identified was the importance of listening to families and building relationships, which was a real key focus of the professional development. They also wanted to gain more knowledge about the languages and cultures of the families they worked in, and that really important third theme of reflecting on their own practices. They also talked about collaborating with other services, undertaking further training, and taking on an advocacy role to support the families in their services as well. So I then undertook 2 follow-up interviews 1 year later. One was with a speech language pathologist and the other was with an English as an additional language coordinator at a primary school. And the thematic analysis of these 2 interviews revealed 4 key themes for engaging in culturally responsive practice in a sustained way. The first was knowing the family. The second was the organisational structures in which they worked. The third was collaborative practice, and the fourth was the ongoing nature of cultural competence. So both of the interview participants talked about the importance of getting to know the family, and that was something that they had really learned from engaging in the PD. And so one said, we're learning to listen to families rather than us ask the questions and tell them what we think they want to know. So I think it's a key thing I've learned now is to actually listen. Stop asking them all the questions that we think are the right questions. Ask them what they want and give them that opening. The second key theme was about the organisational structures in which they work. So the first was that they wanted to identify whether or not families would need an interpreter present prior to entering the service. And this was something that wasn't done before engaging in the PD, which was really encouraging finding. And they also found out about easy to access online interpreter booking services. They also had increased flexibility when working with CALD families, so they were able to advocate for the fact that it took longer to work with families who needed an interpreter because everything needed to be said twice. They also were sharing information about the families across different professions in their service to try and get that more holistic practice going. So one participant said, I've developed a sociolinguistic profile which we use at every new enrolment, and we give it to the classroom teachers and the welfare staff so that they have accurate records. They've got an insight into the child instead of just getting the child's name and his address, and that's all they know about the child. So that was a really big takeaway that they found from the professional development, was the importance of knowing the child and the family, what languages they speak, where they come from, what's important to them. The third was the importance of collaborative practice. And one of these, the thinking around this was initiated by the fact that it was a multidisciplinary professional development. And so they learned multiple perspectives on the case studies that were embedded within the professional development. And so one participant said, the PD was excellent because we went through the case study and looked at it intently, at the different perspectives of the family and what did it mean. I don't think I'd ever done that before. I think anything that allows you to have someone else helping you to think of, if nothing else, gave me an understanding that I need to think beyond the child in the classroom and what their needs are. So this really highlighted for this participant the importance of seeking input from speech pathologists, occupational therapists, social workers, etc., about what's going on with the child and not just looking at the classroom perspective. And the final theme was that ongoing nature of culturally responsive practice, as we've spoken about before. So they said, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string, isn't it? I don't think it ever finishes, the learning. But yes, I feel the insights the workshop gave me took me on a track that I'd not been on before. So now that makes me want to go out and find information. So that was a really encouraging finding, that they didn't think that their work there was done. It just put them on a track towards learning more and more. So what are the implications of this research? We know that cultural responsiveness training is essential for delivering ethical, culturally responsive and client-centred practice. The PD workshops might be an effective avenue for developing this critical consciousness amongst professionals when they're working with diverse families, because the participants demonstrated that they'd begun to think more holistically about the broader social and cultural context in which the families were situated. They acknowledged the role that they play in the social interactions that they were participating in and the impact of their own knowledge and culture upon these interactions. And they'd started to develop new approaches to disrupt these power imbalances that might marginalise the diverse families in their practice. So professional development workshops might act as a catalyst for awakening this critical consciousness amongst early childhood professionals. However, it's so important to remember that it's only ever going to be effective in changing practice if the seeds of critical consciousness are sown in the person who possesses a growth mindset. To merely participate in a workshop is not enough to achieve critical consciousness, but rather these seeds must be continuously nurtured through constant learning, questioning, and adapting in response to new discoveries and experiences around cultural and linguistic diversity. I've published the full paper on this research, and the reference for that is on the screen if you're interested in reading more. Please contact me by email or on Twitter if you're interested to discuss this research any further. Thank you.